Good afternoon, everybody. It's really nice to see some people in the auditorium after a long time. I think the last year when we had our first John Innes Foundation NISD lecture, it was online because we were still in the middle of COVID. So it's really nice to see some of you here. So first, good afternoon to everybody who's here in the auditorium. And also, I think good morning, good afternoon, good evening to people who are online, who are joining us from different parts of the world. So first, for those in the auditorium, I need to quickly tell you that there is no fire alarm test scheduled for today. In the event of a fire, a continuous alarm will sound, and we will proceed via the nearest available exit to the grassed fire assembly point, which is to the right of the main entry road to the site. I hope there won't be a fire alarm. So welcome to this Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development John Innes Foundation lecture. I'm honored that we have such an eminent speaker for our lecture today in Professor Shakuntala Haraksingh Thilsted, and I'm delighted that so many people have registered to join us today. You're all warmly welcomed. In a moment, I'll start the formal proceedings, but first, if you allow me, I'll just say a few words to introduce myself, the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development, and our sponsor, the John Innes Foundation. My name is Nitya Rao, and I'm Professor of Gender and Development at the School of International Development at the University of East Anglia. And I have been involved and working on issues of gender equality and women's empowerment, particularly in contexts of climate variability and economic precarity in both Africa and Asia. I'm also delighted to be appointed the first director of the new Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development in November 2020. The Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development is a new center of excellence which applies world-leading transdisciplinary research to pressing global problems. The Institute harnesses complementary strengths across the Norwich Research Park and focuses on food security and sustainability. This is an internationally recognized strength here in Norwich. So I think we're also trying to give this more visibility by working together to find solutions to global problems. The Institute was launched last year with generous funding from the John Innes Foundation, a UK-based charity which is passionate about the role that science has to play in creating the sustainable societies for the future. And we are delighted also to welcome Peter Innes today in our midst. I would like to thank the John Innes Foundation for their financial support to both the Institute and this lecture, and for their ongoing encouragement, advice, and wise counsel. I'd like to thank Professor Shakuntala Thilsted for honoring us today and her presence and her words. And I would like to also thank, very importantly, my team, very small team at the NISD and colleagues here at JIC for all the work that has gone into the events of today, to the lecture today, and also the events this week. Before proceeding to introduce Dr. Thilsted, I would like first to introduce our host for today, Professor Dale Sanders, the director of the John Innes Center. Dale Sanders has played an enormous role in establishing the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development and continues to be a keen supporter of our work. He has been the director of the John Innes Center since 2010, and I really appreciate, Dale, the support that you have given us. Dale's own research focuses on how plant cells respond to changes in their environment and how they store the nutrients they acquire. His research has implications for crucial food crop traits such as the nutritional value of crops, seed germination, response to drought conditions, and how plants cope with toxic compounds in the soil. Dale has authored over 140 scientific papers, and in 2001 was elected to a Fellow of the Royal Society. The floor is yours, Professor Sanders.
Well, thank you, Nitya, for that very kind introduction. And good afternoon, everybody, or good evening if you're online and overseas. So I'm delighted to welcome you all to the John Innes Centre, to our esteemed lecturer, our colleagues at the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development, friends in the auditorium, all of you, and all of you joining online. you're all very welcome. I'm delighted that you've chosen JIC as the venue for this year's annual lecture. Encouraging interdisciplinarity and establishing the NISD have been personal priorities of mine for the past few years. As I step down as JIC's director later this year, I'll take great pride in NISD's success and continue to take great interest in its future development. It's fantastic to host a lecture of such great standing here, and with such great standing and impact for this year's John Innes Foundation lecture. I look forward to the lecture and to interacting with Professor Haraksingh Thilsted while she is here in Norwich. Some of you might assume that JIC and WorldFish might make strange bedfellows. But however, that assumption would miss the promise of interdisciplinarity. And in fact, JIC chemists have worked with WorldFish in the past, contributing our expertise to a project on prophylactic health products in aquaculture. So that's the beginning of a further collaboration, I feel. So again, welcome to the JIC. Thank you for asking me to speak. And thank you to NISD for doing such a wonderful job, truly meant. And thank you to Professor Haraksingh Thilsted for traveling to be with us today. So I wish you every success for this event. Over to you, Nietzsche.
I would now like to introduce our sponsor for today, Mr. Peter Innes, Chair of the John Innes Foundation. Peter Innes maintains an unbroken line of Innes family members who have been trustees of the John Innes Foundation for 100 years. Mr. Innes served in the British Army and then worked in the financial services sector in Hong Kong and Scotland. Now retired, Peter Innes has been a strong supporter of the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development from its inception, through its development, and now in its first years of successful operation. Thank you, Mr. Innes.
Thank you, Nietzsche. Thank you. I'm going, if I may, just well, first of all, I'd like to welcome you all to this, the second annual John Innes Foundation lecture, organized by the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development. And if I may, I'll just start perhaps with a word to explain of explanation about the John Innes Foundation. It's a charity set up as part of the bequest from my ancestor, John Innes, 100 years ago, and it's been at the forefront of research into plants and microbial science ever since. It spawned what, and it's no exaggeration to say, one of the world's leading research institutes in the John Innes Centre, which Dale is the director of. Which is now located here on the Norwich Research Park. And the park itself is, I think, unique globally for its multidisciplinary approach to sustainable food production, nutrition, and human well-being. By supporting these diverse research communities, we're addressing the most difficult challenges the world faces. It's on this journey for a better future that we are supporting the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development. And it's the reason we're honored to welcome the 2021 UN World Food Prize winner, Dr. Shakuntala Haraksingh Thilsted, to give this John Innes Foundation lecture. The trustees of the foundation are passionate about how science can bring healthy diets to all and nurture the generations of tomorrow. we're aware too, it's not just about terrestrial ecosystems. Therefore, with 2022 marking the UN International Year of Artisanal Fisheries and Aquaculture, we focus our thoughts today on how fish and aquatic species can bring the best solutions for nourishing a healthy population and planet. So I'd like to thank WorldFish for joining us on our mission. I'd like to say thank you to Shakuntala for honoring us today, and thank you to all of you for participating. It's going to be a great afternoon, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter. It gives me great pleasure to now introduce our lecturer for today, Professor Shakuntala Haraksingh Thilsted. Professor Thilsted won the World Food Prize in 2021 for her groundbreaking research, critical insights, and landmark innovations in developing a holistic, nutrition-sensitive approaches to aquaculture and food systems. By bringing together interdisciplinary and international collaborators, she has driven transformations in aquatic food systems to deliver improved nutrition, resilient ecosystems, and secure livelihoods for millions of vulnerable people across the globe. Hailing from Trinidad and Tobago, Professor Haraksingh Thilsted is the first woman of Asian heritage to be awarded the World Food Prize, often referred to as the Nobel Prize for Food and Agriculture. Shakuntala is the global lead for nutrition and public health at WorldFish. Prior to joining WorldFish 10 years ago, she worked as an associate professor in the human nutrition departments of the University of Copenhagen and the Royal Veterinary and Agricultural University in Denmark. She has more than 25 years experience in research and has published many articles on food and nutrition security in low-income countries. Her research on the nutritional composition of small native fish species and the implications of consumption of these affordable and locally available foods on child development and maternal health has had great impact in low and middle income countries across Asia, Africa, and the Pacific. Shakuntala holds a PhD from the Royal Veterinary and Agricultural University in Denmark. And today she's going to talk to us about aquatic foods for nourishing people and the planet. So the format for today is Shakuntala will now deliver her lecture, and there will be questions after the lecture. For those in the auditorium, please raise your hand if you would like to ask a question, and we'll give you the mic. For those online, please type your question directly into the chat function of Zoom, and we will pose as many as we can. Please also write your name and affiliation in the Zoom chat. Professor Thilsted, we now invite you to deliver the lecture. Thank you.
Good afternoon to all. And Nitya, I especially would like to thank you for inviting me to give this year's John Innes Foundation lecture. I will present on aquatic foods for nourishing people and planet. I will begin by giving a short outline of the global food and nutrition security, talk about some of the global agendas that we have had, paying special attention to the UN Food Systems Summit 2021 and moving forward with that, and then move more specifically to aquatic foods, why we consider aquatic foods as superfoods, and why we are so concerned about aquatic foods for nourishing nations. Then I would give some examples of nutrition-sensitive aquatic food systems approaches, which we have used and with partners in Asia, in Africa, and the Pacific, and end with giving 3 recommendations in my conclusion. So if we would begin with the global food and nutrition security. We are all looking forwards to the next 9 harvests, or even less, to the Sustainable Development Goals of 2030. And we do know that we are falling short of the targets we have to meet. More than 800 million people faced hunger in 2020. Of course, these numbers are big in Asia and Africa and Latin America, where you have large population groups. And we know that if we would look at the figures we have from 2019 to 2020, that the situation has moved and is even more dire in 2020 because of the COVID-19. Not only COVID-19, but there have been disruptions caused by climate change, disruptions caused by migration and displacement of people. And now we do know with the war in Ukraine that even more people, FAO has estimated that more than 13 million more people would face hunger directly because of the disruptions caused to food, to fertilizer and fuels with the war in Ukraine. Quite disturbingly is the gender gap that we have seen moving from 2019 to 2020, and the way that the gender gap is affecting more women than men from 2019 to 2020, which is 10% higher more women than men facing food insecurity. The situation in children under 5 years of old remain dire and continue to be an ever-existing problem, with more than 1 in 5 of children under 5 years being stunted. So when we look at our targets and we want them to meeting the goal of SDG 2, zero hunger, it's very worrisome where we are today and where we are going towards 2030 and beyond. Let me start with some of the global narrative and some of the what has shaped some of the agenda going forward with the UN Food Systems Summit 2021. So the UN Food Systems Summit called for transformation in food systems. It's quite difficult for many to understand what is meant by food systems. And if you go to the CGIAR, we talk about food systems, where we talk about transformation of food, land, and water systems in the climate crisis. And that kind of summarizes where we are with the narrative of today. Within the UN Food Systems Summit, a scientific group was established. And this scientific group looked at what are the solutions and the priorities that we should work towards to meeting this transformation of food systems. And 7 priorities have been identified, one being sustain aquatic foods. And with this, what was focused on is increasing the nutritional diversity of aquatic foods, just not fish, just not animal species, and also looking at the opportunities to sequester carbon in marine and freshwater environments. So in summary, which I will come back to at the end, where I stand and the work that I do together with partners, I would say that the transformation of food systems is incomplete without the inclusion of aquatic foods. Within the UN Food Systems Summit, there were 5 action areas, and the group of us have worked together to make sure that aquatic foods have been incorporated across all 5 action areas. And now with the follow-up through the UN Food Systems Coordination Hub, we are looking at opportunities where actions can take place in member states in order to include aquatic foods in the solutions and actions. For example, now everyone talks about how important it is that school children are being given meals that are nutritious and safe. So here we are looking for opportunities to have aquatic foods incorporated in school feeding programs, and with the numbers of displaced people and the numbers of people facing hunger and malnutrition, looking at ways in which aquatic foods can be included in food-based safety nets. Of course, food-based safety nets are short-term solutions, and we have to look to a more broader transformation of food systems that would include aquatic foods. What are aquatic foods? So if I would talk to people in different countries, it would be very different as to what kinds of examples I would get they would give me for aquatic foods. So aquatic foods are the thousands of animals, plants, and microorganisms that are either farmed in or harvested from water. And we also include new technologies and novel foods within this group. And it's important that we pay consideration to aquatic foods from diverse environments. Many people, for example, just work with oceans. This year, we are going to have the UN Ocean Conference, but oceans are not the only source of aquatic foods. You go to Africa and look at the Great Lakes region, with the Great Lakes region, and then the rivers and floodplains and rice fields in the wet seasons also are aquatic environments from where a major source of aquatic foods are derived. Aquatic foods are also important because quite a lot of people, the statistics, however sure they are, we use the figure of 3.3 billion people who consume aquatic foods worldwide, and that over 800 million depend on aquatic foods for livelihoods and income. I use the word that aquatic foods can be considered as superfoods. And I do this because of the multiple benefits that we can derive from aquatic foods. Aquatic foods are recognized as a great diversity of foods, as I've said before. And if we look at the food and nutrition benefits, we now know that there are multiple highly bioavailable micronutrients, both minerals and vitamins, that are found in a diverse range of aquatic foods. And also in many aquatic foods, we have high concentrations of essential fatty acids. Bioavailable micronutrients and essential fatty acids are extremely important for growth, development, and health, especially in young children. On top of that, there are the social and economic benefits, as I mentioned before, with respect to livelihoods and income. And also the engagement of women. And we would like to see the engagement of more youth in aquatic food systems. And to do this, we should pay special attention to the capacity building of especially women and youth within aquatic food systems. Recently, and with COP27 that was held in Glasgow, and now COP26 that was held in Glasgow, and now with COP27 that will be held this year in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt, there's a convergence of transformation of food systems and climate change. And lots of people are looking at the environmental benefits that can stem from aquatic foods and aquatic food systems. I've worked especially with trying to change the global narrative from feeding a growing population to nourishing people and planet. And for me, it's important the words that you use and trying to change the narrative from feeding to nourishing, where I consider feeding and where we've had from the Green Revolution, the focus has been on the quantity of few food staple foods, for example, rice, maize, and wheat, to also include not just quantity, but also the quality of foods. And in terms of quality, I've worked a lot with nutrients and the nutritional quality, but equally important is food as food safety of all these diverse range of aquatic foods. In transforming food systems, we must consider the whole food system in a holistic manner. We have been accustomed in agriculture, in food and agriculture, to focus on production and inputs to production. It would be good if we can also move from consumption and back to supply chains and to production, and not just have a focus on production and inputs to the production. If we do that I've seen in many gatherings, by the time we come to supply chains and consumption and look at consumers, everyone has fallen asleep. So then we keep concentrating just on production. We should also acknowledge and recognize the important role that aquatic foods play in nourishing nations. And in doing that, in the lead up to the UN Food System Summit, we have had the UN Nutrition having a discussion paper on aquatic foods, and the Blue Food Assessment, which was a group of over 100 researchers, an assessment that was led by Stanford University and Stockholm Resilience Center, looking at the data and the evidence and putting together some very strong peer-reviewed papers that show the importance of aquatic foods. If I would just focus on the UN discussion paper on aquatic foods, and it's called The Role of Aquatic Foods in Sustainable Healthy Diets. And why I want to do so is because this paper is recognized by the United Nations, different groups, the different organizations, but also by some of the member states. And this discussion paper was put together in collaboration between UN Nutrition, FAO, and WorldFish. And it addresses the need for a global narrative on nutrition, for promoting diets that are socially, economically, and environmentally sustainable. So it's a much more holistic and broader agenda that takes into consideration people, planet, and equity, making sure that whatever actions we put in place, that they hold true for all, leaving no one behind. This paper also recognizes the importance of aquatic foods, as I said, in sustainable healthy diets, and presents the breadth of the evidence that's important to have in terms of informing and steering the policies, the investments, and the research as we go forward. And importantly, there are recommendations for how we can use aquatic foods for improving global food and nutrition security. And I would encourage you to read this paper and to look at how we can move forward with the recommendations at all levels, but most importantly, at country level, so that we can improve on food and nutrition security. And again, leaving no solutions that leave no one behind, and also take into consideration the right to food. I've worked also a lot with nutrition-sensitive aquatic food approaches. And this is pretty different when we talk about nutrition-sensitive approaches, because, as I said, moving the agenda from just not the quantity of food produced, but here putting people at the center and meeting the nutritional needs of very different groups of people. For example, pregnant and lactating women, young children, and also the elderly. Again, using the principle of leaving no one behind, even though the solutions may be quite different for the different population groups. A nutrition-sensitive approach also uses multiple entry points in the food systems approach. So, as I said, it would be good if we can move very much from consumption, back from plate waste, all the way to the supply chains and back to production systems and the inputs for production systems. And these approaches we have applied to aquatic food systems, which are diverse and context specific for different parts of the world. We've worked in Asia, in Africa, and the Pacific. And I would give some examples of 4 approaches that we've worked on. One is diversifying the consumption of aquatic foods, as I said, starting with consumption, which is quite new and moving backwards. Improving the diversity in the supply chains and the production systems of aquatic foods, including aquatic foods in national and state policies, and engaging women and youth in aquatic food systems. If we start with diversifying consumption with aquatic foods, when I've talked about aquatic foods as being superfoods, then we look at ways in which we can increase the dietary diversity with fish and other aquatic foods. And our focus has been on women, pregnant and lactating women, and young children in the first 1,000 days of their life. That is from conception until 2 years of age. And working with partners in different countries, we've developed culturally acceptable and also context-specific aquatic food products. For example, dried small fish, which can be added to the complementary meals of young children from the age of six months, but also added to the dishes that are prepared for families. Then small fish powder, which is extremely important, because if you would make a powder of dried fish, then you will be reducing you will be getting a very concentrated product by removing the moisture content in the fish. So you are having an extremely concentrated product that can be added to the meals and the foods of young children. And this is important because we do know that young children have high demands of nutrients, and at the same time, a small capacity of the gastrointestinal tract. And therefore, it's good to have the foods that are given to children with high nutrient densities. For women in Asia, and also we've used this also in Zambia, by making culturally acceptable fish chutneys, where you can add as a condiment to the main meal of women. So it takes no time to prepare. And if you may have a condiment and add a heaped tablespoon to the main meal, then you will be at the same time giving a great boost to micronutrient intakes. And in Cambodia, we've worked with partners that have developed fish wafers that are used in programs for malnourished children. Using aquatic food products is important because we've found out by listening to people and also looking at the data that convenience now is extremely important when you want to choose nutritious foods to add to diets of different population groups. And by having products that are that has a high, that has a long shelf life, and thereby very accessible to many population groups. And by making these products, for example, in the peak production seasons, then you can have a product that's cheap, that's affordable for many, and can be added to diets, and thereby use the ability of aquatic foods as superfoods for nourishing different groups of populations. The next is improving the diversity in production and supply chains. Throughout our food and agriculture, with the Green Revolution and beyond, we've had an issue about how do we increase diversity, both in production and supply chains. And I'll give some examples of what we've done with aquatic foods, starting with work in Bangladesh, where we've diversified the production systems by using polyculture, that is different fish species within the system, both large and small fish species, using homestead ponds, village water tanks. We've done this in Odisha with village water tanks, and wetland water bodies that are found seasonally in many countries of the world, also in African countries. Another approach has been using integrated aquatic and terrestrial production systems. So where you would have aquatic foods in water bodies, for example, in ponds, rice on the rice fields, and vegetables on the dikes of the ponds, and thereby looking at a more holistic food system. Within the supply chains, we've had used methods of solar drying tents, both for households and for communities in parts of Africa, and in the Pacific, looking at solar powered freezers for keeping marine fish. What I'm extremely pleased about in the work that we have been doing is not just looking at consumption, supply chains, and production systems, but working with policymakers at the policy level and to influence policymakers to include nutrition-sensitive aquatic food approaches. And working in Bangladesh, where a lot of the work I have done stem from, we've been able to influence the Bangladesh Second Country Investment Plan, which is named Nutrition Sensitive Food Systems, and pond polyculture with diverse fish species, both small and large species, have been selected as the foremost intervention. And this is based on some of the economic contributions and assessments that have been done by the government of Bangladesh with assistance by Copenhagen Consensus. Also, in Odisha, we've included small fish products in the strategy for Odisha's pathway to accelerated nutrition. And the ways we've done this is including the inclusion of fish and fish products in school feeding programs and in take-home rations for women and girls. And this is an example of inclusion of aquatic foods in state policies that we are seeing other states in India are interested in. So this is a way of having aquatic foods for nourishing people that can play an enormous role in scaling across many states in India, and can also be used in other parts of the world. For example, these approaches can be, of course, adapted to fit African countries, and we can have South-South collaboration where some of these examples and aquatic food systems approaches can be moved from Asia to Africa. Importantly, I do think in moving forward with aquatic food systems and nutrition sensitive approaches, we should find ways to engage more women and more youth. Even though we know the data says that 1 in every 2 workers in the primary and secondary sectors of aquatic foods is a woman. And this we see very much in Africa, perhaps less so in Asia. And we do know that youth participation is low in agriculture, getting lower, but especially in aquatic food systems. And thereby it would be good if we can find space for social inclusion through policy interventions, as I mentioned before, investments in research, investments in scaling, looking at data and technology opportunities, and importantly here, also combining traditional knowledge with new technologies and innovations, and finding ways, again, by using some of the new technologies we have and data technologies for building capacity. But in building capacity, it would also be important to include traditional systems and traditional knowledge. In conclusion, I would like to give 3 points, which I do think is important for us moving forward in having aquatic food systems play an important role for nourishing people and nations. Firstly, we must recognize the crucial role that aquatic foods play in food, land, and water systems transformation. Including water systems is pretty new, and there's much work to be done in making sure that water systems are also included in food supplies and across the food system. And in doing so, we must make sure that these systems are sustainable, nutrition, and importantly, equitable. Again, the point about leaving no one behind is important. We need to amplify the investments in research, innovations, and scaling of aquatic food solutions. And aquatic food solutions are new. We've worked a lot with land systems, and therefore it's now time that we increase the pie of investments and ensure that aquatic foods are included, and at all levels. Household, also intra-household levels, because we know that in consumption, there are differences at intra-household level, at national and regional and global levels. And importantly, when we look at data and we talk about foods and we talk about aquatic foods, we look a lot to the value of the food in terms of a monetary value, and a lot about the food in terms of value as an export food. We must move beyond this and value aquatic foods for nourishing people and planets. We should be finding ways and indicators that talk about the importance of aquatic foods for cognitive development, for school performance, and for intergenerational benefits from a well-nourished woman to a well-nourished child. So let me end by saying that to have a holistic food, land, and water systems transformation that's being called for by the United Nations Food System Summit, that to do so, this is only possible with the inclusion of aquatic foods. Thank you so much.
And I'd like to hand over to my colleagues from NISD, Natasha Grist and Peter Emmerich, to moderate the questions and discussion. I think for people in the auditorium, you can raise your hands and you'll get the mic. And for those online, please enter your questions into chat, and Peter is going to be picking them up. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Shakuntala and Nitya. I think we may have a few questions from the audience and a few from online. It might be helpful if we could have a couple of questions at a time, and if you could say your name and your institutional affiliation before your question, that would be great. So should we start in the audience here? Yeah, thank you. Have the gentleman at the back there, and then Johanna.
Hello. Thank you very much for your fantastic talk. I'm Yang Yue from the Joint Center. My question is, as you mentioned, the modern food systems emphasize the convenience, and how do we strike a balance between the convenience and the nutritious, particularly about the aquatic food? Could you comment on that, please? Thank you.
The convenience.
Yeah, and the nutritious.
Yeah. So I'm surprised when I work in the field and we talk to it's mainly women who feed their children. And if you look at the time it takes to access food, to buy it from the market, to prepare it, to cook it, and then to sit with the 6-month-old child to feed that child, you can easily come up to hours of preparation and feeding. So if you go to many parts, I go to rural Africa, rural Asia, in the Pacific, it's much easier if a child starts walking, just 2 years old, you can give the child a few cents, few rupees in India, that child can go to the nearest shop and buy. And now it's a very convenient that when I was younger, biscuits were packed in long parcels like this. But now you can buy a small packet of 2 biscuits or 3 biscuits, and that child can eat that biscuit for herself. That's not the way you want to feed a child with nutritious foods. And this is why convenience and having products that can be added to the meals and to the foods of children, to women, to all in the family, it's extremely important, because we are seeing in all parts of the world the time that's needed to access food, to prepare foods, and to feed. Many people are now complaining that it takes too much time. We don't have that time. So we need to have foods that are convenient, that also have a high shelf life for a longer period, and that they can easily be added to the meals of different population groups. So for example, with the fish chutney, which is a condiment, as you know, you can add that, it's already prepared, and you can add that to the main meal of a woman, and thereby with 1 heaped tablespoon be meeting some of the micronutrient needs of women. So convenience, and I think with time, convenience will become more and more important.
I couldn't agree with you anymore. So however, I wonder whether convenient food doesn't necessarily mean the ultra processed food.
There's not much, let me start somewhere else. So if you would look at the systems of within humans of consumption, and then the way foods are handled with the gut flora, and then through the digestive systems and absorption, that's very different than the way you would handle foods in the lab, for example. And it can be so that when you are looking at absorption of foods, or you are looking at the different components in food, and you will do a laboratory analysis of ultra-processed foods, that the laboratory methods would be able to tell you the different types of the components that are in the food. However, within the human and the digestive systems, you have you reach to the absorption of foods. Perhaps some of the nutrients that are in ultra-processed foods, even though you can identify them in the lab, are not available through the absorption system. I don't know. I'm just saying that I do not think you can, set them equal, that ultra-processed foods would give you the same benefits as foods that from consumption. But importantly for me, it's not just one food or the other food, it's the diversity of foods on the plate which people eat, and the complementarity that we get between the different foods on the plate. And we do know, for example, that aquatic foods, they enhance the absorption of some of the minerals from other foods on the plate. So I do think an area that we should pay much focus to in our research is looking at the diversity of foods on the plate and the complementarity that exists between different foods on the plate and different food groups. And I do hope that when we do that, we keep a space for some aquatic foods on the plate.
Thank you. If we could pass the microphone to Johanna here. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a fantastic talk. Thank you, Shakuntala. Yeah, my name is Johanna Forster. I'm from the School of International Development. My question was, it related to some of the examples you gave, the fish chutney, the powder. And it seemed to me from what you were saying that those were they being made by women's groups or sort of local collectors, or I guess my question is, what's the role of scaling up and business and the kind of private sector with some of these approaches to improving nutrition, and marrying that with the importance of empowerment and providing jobs for the women who are doing it? So I'm just interested really to hear what you think on that.
It's difficult, and this is something I struggle with. But if you would take the examples I gave for having nutritious foods, for example, in school feeding programs and in safety net programs, these are governmental programs, but there's no way you'd be able to do this governmental program at scale within the country if the private sector is not engaged in ensuring that the products are available. For example, take school feeding program. We have had, I think, in many countries of the world, even when I was a child in Trinidad, milk powder has been part of school feeding programs for generations. And to do that, the private sector has been engaged. So I do think it's marrying the different roles that different groups must play in reaching to scale. How do we get women to be, for example, women to be part of this scaling? And we've seen some examples with working with women community groups. If we take, for example, India, the example I gave with the village ponds in India, the state government of Odisha last year in December gave the right for the 74,000 village ponds. They gave the right to produce fish in the different diverse fish species in these ponds to women's group. And each pond is allocated to the women's self-help groups, which is a group of 10 women. So there must be some ways of marrying these different sectors and the different groups who can then work towards scale, not just leaving it to one sector and other sectors don't have a role to play. And this is why I keep coming back to my line about leaving no one behind. I mean, we should be smart enough to be able to have both women groups working together, men's groups working together, communities working together with the private sector and the governmental and governmental institutions. And there, I think government plays a major role in laying down the ground rules and making sure that it's equitable for all.
Thank you. Peter, we have some questions from online.
Yes, thank you. This is a question from Althea Wang from the University of Queensland, which is, what do you think that aquatic veterinarians can do to play a bigger role to improve food security with regards to aquatic foods?
Aquatic veterinarians. Well, first of all, the focus on aquatic foods and the focus on foods and land and water systems is very new. And when we started with looking at, when people started working with aquatic foods, it again took on the role of looking at aquatic foods with respect to quantity. And in that respect, a lot of emphasis was placed on the genetics of few species and also on the health of few species of fish. So that can be increased and diversified, where we should be working on making sure that the production systems take into consideration diverse species and also take into consideration food safety, but not food safety just at the production at the production level, but also across the supply chains. And it's extremely important because aquatic foods, especially aquatic animals, they're highly perishable when you reach the markets. So there's a great role to play with respect to food safety.
Okay, any questions more from the auditorium? Okay, so we have these two up here, the top there. And then you with the orange after that.
Hello, thank you very much for an excellent and stimulating talk. My name is Will Nash from the Earlham Institute. I was really interested to hear your suggestion about focusing on small fish in diets. I wondered if you could say a bit more about what small fish are. Are they small fish that are farmed, or do they come from the local biodiversity? And if focusing on them as a solution, if they're drawn from the local biodiversity, how do we play off the impact on that biodiversity with the intensification of the aquaculture system?
Yeah. So if you would look at aquatic animals and different fish species, there are many, many thousands. And when I talk about small fish, I talk about the size of the full grown of adult fish. And what we've seen is with this great diversity of fish species, there's also a great diversity of the nutrient composition of the diverse fish species. Perhaps importantly is the nutrient composition of the edible parts of fish. And that makes a big difference if it's a small sized fish and a large sized fish, because the edible parts are quite different from it being a small fish, for small fish species to large fish species. In many countries, when you work with small fish, the whole fish is consumed, and thereby you are having a higher nutrient contribution. So one of the approaches that we've used in the nutrition sensitive approach is having a diversified production system with different fish species, both large and small. And now in Odisha, Assam, and Bangladesh, we are looking at ways in which we can breed some of the small fish species so that they can be included into production systems. And we do not need to, every time we need the brood stock, that we would go out to the wild to collect them. So this is one way of ensuring diversity within farm systems.
That's awesome, thank you. I'll be really interested to try some fish chutney.
Thank you. Go over to the gentleman there at the back in the orange over there. Okay.
Hiya, thanks for the lovely talk. I was really interested in what you said about using kind of as a mechanism to improve social inclusion and youth participation. You mentioned kind of integrating traditional skills with modern technologies. And I was just wondering if you could give one or two examples of what you meant by that.
Well, if you would, again, if you would build on traditional knowledge, and I've done much of my work in Bangladesh. So as an example I can give, women will say to you, with water, when the waters come, our eyesight is better. And at first, it would be difficult to understand what that means. So what's the relationship between water and eyesight? But with waters come the small fish species, which are collected and used at household level as part of the diets. And many of these small fish species have high concentrations of vitamin A. And even that's quite difficult because the vitamin A components found in fish are not the same that are found in meats. So if you would do the nutrient analysis and you do not use the correct laboratory methods, you won't be picking up the vitamin A concentration in small fish species. So by using that traditional knowledge and then looking at building that into laboratory analysis, then you would find out the importance of small fish species as a source of dehydroretinol, which is important as a vitamin A source in diets. And we all know the relationships between vitamin A and eye integrity, sight integrity.
Thank you. Yes, yes. We have a microphone.
I know very well your subject was fish, but you did early on in the talk, you mentioned other aquatic products like seaweed, for instance. Now, do you see possibilities in developing those sort of products as a...
That's my hope, and I hope I'm going to work for some more years. And all the work that I've done with small fish, I now have a title, and I'm just starting to raise funds, and it's called A New Frontier for Nourishing People and Planet, Seaweed. So I do think seaweed holds a lot of promise, both as a superfood and also for planetary health. So there are people in the audience I know who are working with seaweed, and it would be really great if we can set up some working groups around seaweed, because so that we not only look at seaweed as a food, but also the effects on environment, and also looking at the ways in which we can develop these convenient products from seaweed. And we do know that seaweed, but there are again thousands and thousands of species of seaweed. So if we would start farming seaweed, we would also have to do quite a lot of research about what types of species we use and where they would grow best. And also importantly is how do you get local populations in areas where perhaps seaweed is not culturally a part of local diets to become an important food in the diet. So I see seaweed as a new frontier, and now especially with the marriage of the UN Food Systems Summit and moving forward with transformation of food systems and all the work that's being done through the COP conferences with respect to climate. So I see there's a lot we can do together.
Thanks, Shakuntala. And for Peter, I have a question online.
Thank you. I would just like to ask a follow-up question on the seaweeds, because it's a really fascinating subject and such a big area of growth. But as we scale up production of seaweeds to the tens of millions of tons that we need to make a significant impact on global food systems, what sustainability challenges do you foresee from coming through that scaling?
I don't know, and I don't think, it's so new, as I said, it's a new frontier. So I really wouldn't know how we would do this, but I do hope that if you would take the production systems, that they will be able to complement other systems. Because if you would look at coastal populations, the marine system is extremely important for food, for livelihoods, for income, for culture, for religion. And if you would, I would imagine you just can't occupy the whole area with seaweed farming. So there would have to be some kinds of consideration as to how you take the communities in hand and look at their values for what they have and how they use the space. So I guess if you would talk from people that come from outside and just look at the area of the coastlines, then they would say, oh, we can use the whole coastline for seaweed production. But then I do think what I talked about the nutrition sensitive approach, where you put people first and you take into consideration the priorities of communities, then I do think we could reach to a space where we can have a good marriage between the different forces.
Thank you. Now I've got a question from Majdi El Manouchi from the Tunisian Seafood Interbranch Association. Asking about the role of fisheries agroeconomists and what they can do to contribute to greater food security through aquatic foods.
So when we talk with economists and agroeconomists, and as I said in my closing recommendations, and this is not only for aquatic foods, this is for all foods in general, we put a monetary value in food. So we use indicators that are only based on monetary value, on quantity, monetary value, export, trade. It would be great if economists can develop other parameters that can be used for value and just not monetary value. And there must, I mean, just think if you would look at the importance of cognitive development, if we can put indicators for cognitive development and the effect that this has on national development, I am sure we can have, we can change policymakers and change the way they look at foods and look at transformation of systems.
Thank you.
To have more questions from the auditorius.
Hello, I'm Elizabeth Lund. I'm a retired nutritionist with associations with UEA. You focus very much on the micronutrients, which is more my area of research as well, but in fish. But protein is a big issue, and there's a big push towards plant proteins. But fish provides such a high quality protein. And I'm just wondering why you didn't mention that really.
Purposely. Because it detracts so much when we talk about fish and we term it a protein food. And firstly, as a nutritionist, you will know that there's a recommendation for protein in diets, but there's no recommendation for animal source protein. You can get proteins from many different sources, and combinations of different foods can meet your protein requirements. However, if you move to micronutrients and essential fatty acids, and you look at many diets, and especially for the poor and vulnerable, these nutrients are lacking in their diets. I'm happy you asked that question, because many ask me, how can you talk about aquatic foods and nutritional contributions and never mention protein? And it's quite purposeful from my side.
Thank you. I have a question here, yes.
Thank you so much for a very good talk. My name is Noemi Tejera. I'm from Quadram Institute. And my interest, I have a big interest in fatty acids and omega-3s. And I wonder if there is a parallel type of studies going on to see if these foods, like drying or creating different forms with the food, with the fish, has an impact in the composition, and that plays a role into like deciding which ones go for, apart from being culturally accepted, etc.
So that's an important field of study, nutrient composition of different foods, and how does processing, cooking, cleaning affect the nutrient compositions of the foods that are then consumed, the parts of the foods that are then consumed. And I do think we in the work we do, we have to be we have to be practical, and we also have to look for ways on how we handle all these different issues, because there's no way that you can take every food item and analyze the nutrient composition, and not just the nutrient composition of the raw food, but then the cleaned, the edible parts, the cooking, what happens through cooking, what happens through storage, what happens by if you add X grams of X volume of water, and then you have leakage of nutrients. So it's difficult to know exact values, but I do think, first of all, we should do some more work on nutrient composition, and we should do very much more work on developing better methods for nutrient composition and faster methods. I've talked to people who work with nanotechnology, and they are saying we can have methods that are much faster for looking at nutrient composition in different foods and in different parts of the food. So there's much more to be done than we have than where we are today.
Thank you. Any more questions from the auditorium? Yeah. Do you like the microphone?
Hi, it's Naomi from the Chutney Center. I'm not a scientist, but I could be a potential consumer of your fish wafer. I'm very interested. How far do you think? How long are we going to see that on the Tesco shelf? Thank you.
I don't have the skills. I mean, people have asked me that, and I really feel I don't have the skills or background to work together with, to bring different sectors together. But we've done so. There are others who have done so within the food sector, within other sectors of life. So I'm sure it can be done. I do see that the partnerships have to be developed with communities, with the private sector, but also importantly with the government. So we make sure that the pathways we choose are equitable pathways and just pathways, and take into consideration the needs of all, especially the poor and vulnerable. I've asked, there are private sector companies that work a lot with animal feeds, and they use fish in animal feeds, a lot in pet foods for cats and dogs. And I have talked to some of these companies and said, what if we would take 10% or less of your production and use that for human products? And I get no takers. And I said, you are in this business because it is profitable to make animal feeds. I can't imagine it's not profitable to also make human food. So there must be some way where we can have a marriage between these sectors. But I haven't been able to make any dentists yet.
Thanks. Have we got any more questions? I have up here behind you, Konstantinos here.
Thank you for a very nice talk. So I'm Konstantinos Salvadris, Academic Chef for Climate, UEA. So I'm very interested by what you said. I mean, obviously we know that aquatic foods are very important for their nutritional value and so on. But I'm also sitting here thinking these are the foods which are most threatened by plastics pollution. And I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that? I mean, how much can we be looking into the future for, aquatic foods without plastics in them? Because I think that's one of the major threats for this supply.
Yes, and I mean, all water bodies, both marine and inland water bodies, are plagued with plastic pollution. I've seen only few examples about where fish samples have been taken. Where I'm talking now about it in low and middle income countries. A few studies I've seen from Bangladesh. I haven't seen anything out of Africa, and of course in some of the well-developed, the high-income countries like this, Nordic countries, work is being done. So I am sure this is an area that's good. That will grow. To look at the food safety, where plastics is one and maybe a big threat, but there are also other areas of food safety that we should be taking into consideration, and also not just aquatic foods, but we know also about contaminants, for example, lead contaminants in terrestrial foods. So in the beginning, when I started my work on quality, I just concentrated on nutritional value. And today I know I cannot just talk about quality in terms of nutritional value. At the same time, I must give equal importance to food safety issues. And it's a growing issue.
Thank you. Okay, if we have no more questions, or Nietzsche, you have a question.
Thank you, Shakuntala. Just to follow up on that question on food safety, because of course aquatic foods I think are also perishable. And when you mentioned the products about having the paste or whatever and the shelf life, I think there's often a risk that if you want to extend the shelf life, then you may include more of preservatives or other kind of chemical products, which might work against the actual value of this thing, and also the risk actually of something spoiling if these preservatives are not used, and then people consuming it. So I just thought that, what is the trade-off actually between maintaining quality and the shelf and the safety?
So we've done a little, some few experiments on the shelf life and the food safety of, for example, dried fish powder, especially because you can keep it at ambient temperature, room temperature, and we've done it in Bangladesh and in Zambia, and we know that the fish powder, if it's kept, for example, in a bottle at room temperature, and you use a clean spoon to take out the amount that you need every day or whenever you use it, that it lasts for more than 6 months. With the fish chutney for women, I've used the traditional methods, as you know, for mango chutney, and where vinegar is used as the preservative. So there are no added preservatives other than vinegar but it contains, for example, chili, for example, in the recipes we've used in Asia. And of course, chili has components that also act as preservatives. But I'm sure if we have to move it up to, large scale, then the processes for making large amounts and having better shelf life, better storage, would have to be modified.
Thank you. Have we got any more questions? Okay, then I'll hand over back to Nietzsche then. Thank you.
So it gives me great pleasure to thank Shakuntala for this very interesting lecture, for raising lots of questions, but also I think at the Norwich Research Park for opening up a research agenda for us moving forward on many interesting dimensions of aquatic foods for meeting the Sustainable Development Goals. So thank you very much for that. And thank you everybody, both online and in the room, for asking questions. I would now like to invite you for a reception just outside in the foyer. Please join us also to have some informal conversation with Shakuntala and meet others. And we will also be signing an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding between the Norwich Institute for Sustainable Development and WorldFish to carry forward the partnerships in the coming years. So please do join us outside in the reception area.